Hello, and welcome to The Nature of Healing, a podcast in time that is all about exploring the many facets of healing. I'm your host, Jen Shepard, and I'm excited to be here today with you as we dive into the world of healing. This podcast is produced by Bolts of Love, and at The Nature of Healing, we believe that healing is not just a process, but a movement, a recognition of love in any situation, whether it be physical, emotional, spiritual, or mental. Each episode is a chat on another way to approach healing for ourselves and our communities. So sit back, relax, and join us as we explore the nature of healing together. Welcome. Again, my name is Jen Shepard. I'm so happy to be with you here today. And today, I've done a lot of thinking and a lot of searching my own self and a lot of extra reading about this practice of denials and how that fits into our own lives and into the Unity tradition. So in Unity and in the tradition, we recognize denials and affirmations of this foundation of our healing, of our wholeness, of our alignment. When we notice something that we don't like about ourselves, we deny that. We deny aspects of that. We repeat that over, we hold it in our thoughts, and then we affirm what it is that we would like to replace it. Also, mostly in words and thoughts. In the book Heart-Centered Metaphysics, there's a quote here I'd like to share with you. It says, "Denial is primarily a process concerned with eliminating errors found in one's own consciousness. It is based on one of the 12 powers, the power of elimination and renunciation. It is a built-in process that supports life-enhancing decisions and choices. It involves thinking and feeling, resulting in the realization that the error is not the truth. And in a spiritual sense, denial is based on the idea that all error thought has no basis in reality. Therefore, these conditions have no power in and of themselves. They simply have the power, thought force, life substance that we give them. We use denials to release ourselves from the error thoughts by denying power, life, and substance to them. We release ourselves from a belief in the power or reality of anything other than divine mind, which is absolute reality." Now, I have to admit that in reading this, the whole concept of erroneous thought, that we need to deny parts of ourselves to be in alignment with divine mind and divine divinity, it's just not sitting right. And over the last few weeks, I have read and listened to all I could get a hold of from Unity tradition on denials. The word denial itself, if we just take that word, it harkens for me back to these memories I have on sitting in a church on a Sunday morning with my family, in which we repeated words of things like, we're not worthy. And that in order to be worthy, we had to keep repeating these things, and we had to keep showing up at this church every Sunday. And that even that wasn't enough sometimes to be worthy of divinity. So in recognizing that that's where that thought and those words took me, I started recognizing and working with, what is erroneous thinking? What does that even mean? And as humans, we are flooded with an overwhelming typhoon of thoughts on an hourly basis, let alone count all the stray happenings in our minds that happen throughout the entire day. There's an acknowledgement that beliefs and perceptions may longer be appropriate for what we understand and feel right now. The understanding is that we may flow with the changing of our experience, and that feels more exact to what we're trying to accomplish. there's a recognition that all those thoughts that go through our mind every day, not all of them are going to show up in reality, because part of our human system is just to run the human program and the mind, and our brain just keeps on going. So this idea of erroneous thought seems really antiquated in the verbiage. This idea that we have to deny parts of ourselves, deny just the operations of our humanness, and regular operations in our humanness being in error somehow. It's quite antiquated. So when we do want to push something out of ourselves, when there's this need or this feeling to deny something, we really need to move into this area where we're feeling. Why do we want to deny that thought or that feeling to begin with? What is inside of us, or what are we holding on to? That's the call for healing and wholeness. It's allowing the feeling and the recognition of these things, not merely pushing them away. I know in the literature, there is a movement towards understanding this in the years since it first got introduced, over 100 years ago. I think sometimes when we have the older teachings and the older verbiage, we tend to hold on to that sometimes and not understand how to grow that up into a present and more whole understanding. And unity does inspire each of us to live the truth that we know in the moment, which is amazing, because this allows for us to continually grow up and integrate what we knew with what we know and what we're in the process of knowing. When we know more and realize more, we become more whole when we integrate that realization. And we are in the process of knowing that there is never really an error of thinking or of wrong thinking. Thinking happens. Our thoughts are not automatically things. If this were the case, every stray thought we had would play out in front of us at any given time. But the thoughts we place weight on, the ones that have a feeling behind them, will come to the surface and become part of how we see our world. So to understand and to recognize when thoughts that we add extra feeling to and meaning to no longer serve us, no longer hold a good space in our relationship with the way we are in our knowing in the present moment, the way we understand our connection to divinity, to the divine nature. That's where we start in this practice that was coined denial. It's a pointing us forward into wholeness. This is true healing. It's the healing of community. It's the healing of understanding, the moving into wholeness, and the healing of our nature itself. Now, we can be angry, and when we're fearful, and when we feel that we are in a corner and the whole world is against us, this moment, that moment, is when we can use the feelings of what we must be doing or thinking in error and the need of denial as an actual springboard into true healing and integrating what we have learned within that process. We understand that there's no outside force or evil's ability to harm us in any way. We know it's not an external force that causes harm, or discomfort. It's an internal one, a human one. It's how our humanity perceives and interprets both the internal and the external world. It's a chance to cast light on the stories we have told ourselves about not being worthy, about not being lovable, about not being capable. In today's language, we call this working with our shadow. It's bringing that shadow to light, not denying that it exists in the first place. The power of words is the power of the intertwining and the resonance of the words and the thoughts with the feelings. So the power of words, there's only power there when we place weight on them, when our feelings are in alignment with those words. We can train ourselves to be in a space of love and healing. We can train ourselves to be engaged in a resonance between our heart and the head. And when we do that, we create the necessary effects for a new pattern to emerge within us. So it's not suppressing a pattern. It's not denying a pattern. It's not saying over and over again that this pattern no longer has hold of us, although that could be part of it. It's bringing that pattern, though, to the surface and sitting in that uncomfortable nature of what's happening and being willing to see inside of it, to feel inside of it, sit right in the middle of it, not denying that it's a part of us, but feeling it, feeling where it's coming from. My first son was born 3 days shy of my 22nd birthday, and I had complications from his birth that included an unscheduled cesarean, and that became infected, and I landed back in the hospital. So I had a very emotional, fragile time in the first few weeks of my first son's birth. And my family, the family I grew up in, especially my father, had been very keen about never showing any discomfort. So as I was growing up, you didn't show your discomfort. That was not the way to be. And so keeping that in mind, my parents came to visit shortly after I came home from the hospital the second time. And I found myself alone in the room with my father. And he asked why I named my baby what I had. And I told him, I said his first name was in honor of the baby brother I never got to meet. And he died less than an hour after he was born. And also for my uncle, who had meant and still does the world to me. And he had died while I was pregnant with my son. I started to cry. And my father immediately told me to straighten up and not let my mother see me crying. Essentially, deny that I was feeling the grief, weak. I was feeling vulnerable and fearful and very, very worn out and tired. I had to affirm that I knew all was well. That's what I was being asked to do. Say all is well and act all is well. Just do it. And for many years, I consciously made every effort not to allow any uncomfortable or difficult emotion to be visibly present. And that started to move into not even acknowledging those uncomfortable feelings for myself. Now, sometimes when we hear stories like this, and I can imagine some of you, are thinking or may believe that my father is just a relatively insensitive, even bordering on awful, for his comments and his lack of compassion for me in that moment. Some of you may think that denying totally that feelings are a part of any human experience is necessary, that moving right into affirmations is what we're asked to do. And there's another group of you that would like to tell me or ask me what I thought about being taught such neat lessons in the moment that I must have brought to me somehow in some kind of erroneous thinking, that cesarean, that hard birth, that exchange from my dad, that I brought that on myself in some fashion from erroneous thinking. And if that being the case, I need to be in gratitude that I've learned something from that experience. All of the above I have heard. What I understand now, though, for me, is that my father was denying his feelings as much as he was instructing me to deny my own. I heard a joke recently about Generation X, which I am a part of, that we were told to suck it up and get over it. And that's partly why we are the way we are today. I'm not sure this is totally a joke. It's very, very accurate, at least from my experience. And when we suck it up and get over it, when we deny our humanity is just shouting at us what our experience is now, we set ourselves up for this emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual illness. We set ourselves up to stunt our growth and our unfoldment when we are sucking it up and getting over it. In Lessons of Truth, I'm going to read a quote here from Katie in Lessons of Truth, lesson number 4. She says that no person or thing in the universe, no chain of circumstances, can by any possibility interpose itself between you and all joy, all good. You think something stands between you and your heart's desire, so live with that desire unfulfilled. But it's not true. This thing is the bugaboo under the bed with no reality. Deny it. Deny it. And you will find yourself free and realize that this was all false. And when you see the good flowing into you and you see clearly that nothing can stand between you and your own. Now, that was written in 1896. 1896. And for 1896, this is brilliant. This recognition that we oversee our healing and we oversee our own outlook. We only started to understand what denials told our psyche, our humanity at that time. And then comes Carl Jung, who adopted a similar notion in the 1920s. And it wasn't until HeartMath was founded in 1991 that a system of practical and scientifically based tools and technologies are developed to bridge that intuitive connection between heart and mind and deepen our connection with the hearts of others. And this research from HeartMath lent some really natural scientific weight to what Carl Jung was saying about the shadow. In 2006, Ken Wilber published a book called Integral Spirituality, in which he talks about the 3-2-1 process of shadow work. And in 2010, doctors Gary and Jane Simmons first published their work and research penned the quantum living process, which takes the best of the spiritual understanding dating all the way back to the 1896 and brings it into a tangible and working process for us today to work intelligently with those items in ourselves that we would like to deny totally. These improvements, these realizations, these works that have been published and the practices that have been developed for shadow work moves us beyond that danger zone of spiritual bypassing, which is really easy to do in the realm of denials. It moves us past that and into the healing and integration of what we want to deny ourselves. or about ourselves. Now, in the quantum living process, these items are called triggers. I prefer the word activation. When we find something to deny, our human psyche activates. And when we recognize it, it doesn't align with our spiritual selves, then we start to do the work. I'm going to read you a quote from the Quantum Living Coaches Manual, page 234. It says, bringing the shadow into light begins with compassion and gratitude to our disowned and repressed aspects. It begins with acknowledging that we have had difficult experiences, but the myths, messages, and beliefs that were created are not the truth of us. We may have the belief, I am unworthy, but we are not that belief. Getting some distance from the shadow aspects of ourselves is an important step in healing. It allows us to place our focus on ourselves while at the same time not shrinking from the shadow we discovered. So in being activated and recognizing that we are either angry, fearful, spiteful, judgmental, etc., all of those words we put into the negative category, we recognize something that's in us that may be within the shadow area of our psyche. In 1896, it was a forward understanding to learn that we did not need to buy into those emotions or to become them. Hence the denial. Denying them, suppressing them, seemed like an appropriate answer. Just ignore that stuff. Just don't even pay attention to it, because that's not you. True, it's not you. And that was totally a good step in the right direction. Today, let's move 1896 into today. We understand how much of our physical nature is mixed up with our memories and our emotions. Each time we work around a feeling, deny its existence, or suppress it, our body remembers. Our bodies try to keep us safe from emotions, thoughts, and situations that we have unconsciously told it are harmful to us in some way. So, for example, for years and years and years and years and years, I thought I was claustrophobic. I was told that claustrophobia runs in my family, which was an explanation for why I would panic in certain situations. I started to be aware over time, though, that, and through this type of healing work with my shadow self, that the places I had the most panic and anxiety, and the places where I removed myself because of the physical reactions happening in my body, all had some similarities. They were places like hospitals, long-term care facilities, funeral homes, and crowds where I didn't have an anchor person, like somebody that I knew with me. I already pointed out that I grew up in a home where stoicism was the way. No need to be privy to your internal discomfort or sorrow, and even sometimes being privy to your own joy. When I was really young, my grandfather had a heart attack and he was in the hospital. And of course, we went to see him, and my grandmother was crying, and my grandfather did not look well at all. And I remember moving myself into the hallway outside of his room and starting to cry. And almost immediately, my mother telling me there was no reason for me to be crying like I was. No reason at all. And instead of mingling in these places, especially in funeral homes, I often stayed in the way back of the funeral home because, and I realize this now, I could control my discomfort and grief even as a young child when I remove myself from being around everybody else. So all these places where I was told my discomfort and needing to leave were based on my inherited claustrophobia or my allergic reaction to smells within the buildings, I discovered were all places of lots and lots of emotions. There was grief and fear and anger over these situations. And I was not immune to feeling those things or realizing others were feeling those things. Yet I had denied and suppressed those types of feelings in such a way that my body tried desperately to keep me from situations where those uncomfortable feelings would come to the surface. So my body would go into anxiety and panic mode. And then I would have a legitimate reason to remove myself from the situation. I had a legitimate reason not to feel those feelings and return to smiling sunshine and kittens. Now, this is all running in the subconscious. It's not like I told my body, okay, it's time to have an anxiety attack. But my body knew that I had told it and told myself that those were things that were unnecessary, that for some reason they would bring harm to me. So I had to take a really good look at those things I denied. I had to take a look at all those repressed things and bring them to the surface. I had to look inside this time capsule of events that made me feel like I was doing things wrong if I felt a certain way. And I had to look at instances where I thought I was not enough and couldn't handle life because I removed myself from situations where I was panicking and overwhelmed with anxiety. I also went through a process of forgiveness for myself for thinking I was somehow doing life wrong. When I had moments where I wanted to punch pillows or raise my voice or just, go out and do the primal scream to release, all this anger, I had to let myself learn how to feel. I had to teach myself that feeling is not the end of everything, and to feel everything from one end to the positive scale to the other end of the total negative scale, to feel everything. This also has allowed me to know that every little thing that floats through my head isn't going to happen or mean that I'm a terrible person. It means I am human. I am human with a mind that runs rapidly and makes up stories. It is the only one I pay attention to. It's the stories I pay attention to and give weight to in my feelings that will catch any momentum. I had to look at all moments from my perspective when the perceptions of those around me as much as possible. I had to look at my viewpoint and I had to look at the viewpoint of others and try to understand them. This is part of that 3-2-1 method. We recognize multiple perspectives. It's easier to see that our reaction tells us something about ourselves and how we interpret the world and how we feel about ourselves. I've learned that by looking at all perspectives, that my parents were less comfortable than myself and grew up in families with limits on what was acceptable regarding their expression, much more than what they were imparting onto me. I knew that there was a strong belief that expressive children were somehow inappropriate when they grew up. And that meant that the parents didn't have control of their children if they were too expressive. That realization in my own shadow work allowed me to feel and send and express compassion for the adults uncomfortable with my emotions. I started to understand why I took on that coping mechanism of anxiety and panic attacks for myself when I deemed myself less. If I was having trouble denying that I wanted someone to fly off a building when I was upset. Now, none of this means that the Fillmores are somehow wrong. They're totally right. They're in the flow of understanding. We may not always understand the healing work that needs done to let go of the old, right? So they taught that denying let go of everything we were holding on to that no longer serves. It's letting go of the old systems. And yes, we need to let go of the old systems. We know now today that's more of an integrating what we have learned when we recognize it as an old system and then moving forward, then totally pushing it outside of ourselves. Charles Fillmore says in the book Prosperity that it is necessary that one should let go of old thoughts and conditions after they have served their purpose, as it is that one should lay hold of new ideas and create new conditions to meet one's requirements. We cannot lay hold of new ideas and make new conditions until we have made room for them by eliminating the old. He also says that it is found that by using these mind forces, man can dissolve things by denying their existence and build them up by affirming their presence. This is a simple statement, but it becomes complex when applied to all the intricate thought forms of the universe. The law of mental denial and affirmation will prove its truth to all that persistently use it. And in Unity Metaphysics, in the section 18 in Denials and Affirmations, it says denial and affirmations are the two great expressions of polarized energy in life. Both are essential. Both serve us to evolve consciousness in obedience to spiritual law. Denial is the ability to let go of the old, the outworn, the negative attitude, the incorrect belief. It is also the ability to refuse to reject. It is the great nay, nay saying power of mind. And affirmation is the ability to accept the newer, truer, the higher, the more correct attitude and belief. It is also the ability to say yes and accept better concepts of divine ideas. It is the yeah power of the mind. I like to take all of that and interpret it for today and in today's language. And understand that denials are a compass reading north when we understand that our system, emotions, thoughts, and body reactions point to something that we need to spend some time with. One way we're able to do this is the art of quantum living. Another is 3-2-1 shadow work. Another may be employing a therapist and doing work one-on-one with a therapist. We let go and deny the beliefs that we have held about ourselves. And in the examples that I gave about myself, I learned that I believed I was not enough and incapable of uncomfortable feelings surfacing. I could see those instances in another light and deconstruct that story I told about myself from the reactions of the people around me. And then I found that my negative attitude there and the stories I told myself there were not to be denied. But the story I told myself about self-worth and those so-called negative attitudes or the so-called error of thinking could be reinterpreted. I love the pioneers of New Thought. They laid the groundwork for us to be where we are today. And people like the Fillmores and Katie are amazing pioneers of thinking and reasoning and healing and fearlessness in sharing what they did with others. They took antiquated concepts learned and held from our Abrahamic traditions and shed light on them in a way that helped many remove themselves from this perceived victimhood of forces that were seemed greater than themselves. Now we're several generations later, and we are uniquely positioned to shine a light on what we have learned and can grow into. We can use the tools of psychology and biology and philosophers, researchers, healers, in our innate connection to spirit to bring the idea of denials into how they are the forerunners of shadow work. And shadow work is a necessary part of healing, self-growth, and the integration of what we have learned, and move that back into our essence. And this integration part of navigating a future, a very human future, using our spiritual natures to navigate and understand our life starting now and moving forward. Thank you all for sharing some time with me today and my exploration and my thoughts around my own denial and affirmation process. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions. I'd love to take those in and work on those for myself and discuss them even further. You can send all your comments and your questions to boltsoflove@gmail.com. That's BOLTS@gmail.com. And again, you can find me at Unity in Edinburgh, and you can find me at boltsoflove.com. So much gratitude for being able to share with you. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful time working with and understanding your shadow. It is such challenging work, at least it was for me, and yet so worthy of our attention and time and compassion with ourselves as we work through those healing and wholeness processes. Take care.